High Admiral Vextar stood before the massive viewing screen of his flagship, watching the blue planet rotate slowly in the distance. Earth looked so small and peaceful from here, just another world waiting to join the Zephyrian Empire. He had conquered 67 star systems in his long career, and this would be the easiest victory yet. The humans barely had space travel. Their largest ships were tiny compared to his destroyers, and their weapons used primitive chemical explosives. This conquest would take maybe a week. The intelligence reports on his desk told the whole story. Humans had only reached their own moon a few decades ago. They still used rockets that burned fuel to reach orbit, and their military technology was laughably backward. Their nuclear weapons were powerful enough to damage their own planet, but they would be useless against Zephyrian shields. Vextar had seen this pattern many times before. Species that thought they were advanced until they met real galactic civilization. What the High Admiral did not know was that humanity had been watching the stars for much longer than the Zephyrians realized. Deep beneath the Australian desert, Dr. Lisa Chen worked in a laboratory that officially did not exist. For 20 years, she had been developing quantum communication technology, turning theoretical physics into practical applications. Her breakthrough had come 6 months ago, when she successfully created an instantaneous communication link between Earth and a probe near Jupiter. The implications were staggering, but the military applications were what kept her project funded. Admiral Jake Morrison received the quantum transmission in his office beneath the Rocky Mountains. The message was simple but terrifying. Alien ships had been detected at the edge of the solar system, and they were heading toward Earth. Morrison had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. First as a submarine commander learning to fight invisible enemies in the depths of the ocean, then as the head of a secret military program that most people thought was science fiction. He picked up his secure phone and began making calls that would change human history. Captain Ryan Blake was testing humanity's first real warship when the alert came through. The USS Liberty was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, hidden from telescopes and radar, powered by experimental fusion reactors that produced more energy than anything humans had built before. Blake had designed the ship himself, incorporating lessons from every war humanity had ever fought. Unlike the elegant alien vessels in the intelligence photos, the Liberty was built like a fortress with armor plating, redundant systems, and weapons that could keep firing even if half the ship was destroyed. The Zephyrian advance fleet consisted of 12 ships, each 1 kilometer long and bristling with energy weapons that could crack a planet's crust. High Admiral Vextar commanded from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a vessel that had never lost a battle in 3 centuries of service. His crew was confident. They had done this so many times that the conquest of primitive worlds had become routine. They would demonstrate their power, demand surrender, and add another species to the empire. It always worked. When the Zephyrian fleet reached the asteroid belt, they expected to find mining operations and maybe some small defensive platforms. Instead, they encountered something that should not have existed. The USS Liberty emerged from behind a large asteroid, followed by 20 converted mining ships that had been secretly armed with weapons that the aliens did not recognize. Captain Blake opened a communication channel and spoke words that would echo through galactic history. "We are the United Earth Defense Force, and you are not welcome here." High Admiral Vextar was so surprised that he almost laughed. The human ships were tiny compared to his fleet. Their hulls looked crude and primitive, and they were challenging the most powerful military force in the galaxy. He opened his own communication channel and delivered the standard ultimatum that had worked on dozens of worlds. "Your resistance is pointless. Surrender now and your species will be allowed to serve the Empire. Refuse and your world will be destroyed." He expected immediate capitulation, but the human response shocked him to his core. Captain Blake's reply came through clearly on all frequencies. "Our answer is no, we will not surrender, we will not serve, and we will not let you pass. If you want our world, you will have to take it from us, and we promise that will cost you more than you are willing to pay." The human ships began to move into attack formation, and for the first time in his long career, High Admiral Vextar felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He felt worried. The battle began when the Zephyrian destroyers fired their main weapons at the human fleet. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains struck the Liberty's shields and armor, but the ship kept coming. Human technology was different from anything the aliens had encountered. Instead of elegant energy barriers, They used layers of dense metal and ceramic that absorbed and dispersed incoming fire. The Liberty's hull glowed white-hot under the bombardment, but it did not break. Captain Blake ordered his ships to return fire, and the Zephyrians discovered that human weapons were as unconventional as human defense. Instead of energy beams, the humans fired solid projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic fields. These kinetic rounds ignored Zephyrian shields completely, punching through alien hull plating like it was paper. The destroyer that had been leading the attack suddenly found itself with a hole through its engine section and began to drift helplessly. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The mining ship Prospector's Hope, commanded by a former asteroid miner named Pete Johnson, found itself surrounded by 3 Zephyrian fighters. His ship was damaged, his crew was injured, and conventional tactics said he should surrender. Instead, Johnson did something that no Zephyrian commander would ever consider. He aimed his ship at the nearest enemy destroyer and pushed his engines to maximum power. The Prospector's Hope slammed into the Zephyrian destroyer at 20% the speed of light, and both ships disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire. High Admiral Vextar watched in horror as a primitive mining vessel destroyed one of his most powerful warships simply by crashing into it. This was not how civilized species fought wars. This was madness. But it was terrifyingly effective madness. His crew was beginning to show signs of fear, something he had never seen in 3 centuries of conquest. The human fleet continued to fight with a creativity and desperation that the Zephyrians could not understand. When their weapons were damaged, they improvised new ones. When their ships were crippled, they turned them into weapons, and when they were outnumbered, they used tactics that seemed to defy military logic. Dr. Chen's quantum communication network allowed every human ship to coordinate perfectly, while the Zephyrian fleet struggled to adapt to an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. After 6 hours of fighting, High Admiral Vextar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered his fleet to retreat. 3 of his ships had been destroyed, 4 more were badly damaged, and his crew was demoralized by an enemy that fought like nothing they had ever encountered. As his fleet pulled back to the edge of the solar system, Vextar realized that conquering Earth would not be the simple victory he had expected. The humans had done something that no species had accomplished in 3,000 years of Zephyrian expansion. They had made the Empire's military machine hesitate, and that hesitation would change the galaxy forever. 6 months passed before High Admiral Vextar returned to the Sol system, and those 6 months changed everything. The Zephyrian High Command had been furious about the defeat. No Empire fleet had ever retreated from a technologically inferior species, and they demanded that Earth be made an example to the entire galaxy. Vextar now commanded the largest invasion fleet in Zephyrian history, 24 capital ships and over 300 support vessels, enough firepower to destroy every planet in the solar system twice over. What the Zephyrians did not realize was that humanity had used those 6 months better than any species in galactic history. Dr. Lisa Chen had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the first battle, pushing her quantum research to its absolute limits. Her breakthrough came when she realized that the same principles that allowed instantaneous communication could be applied to matter transportation. The first successful test transported a coffee cup from Earth to Mars in 0 time. But the military applications were immediately obvious. Admiral Jake Morrison coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. Every nation on Earth contributed resources to the defense effort, and orbital shipyards around Jupiter worked around the clock to build a fleet that could stand against the Zephyrian Empire. The new ships incorporated lessons learned from the asteroid belt battle, but they also included technologies that should have been impossible for a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight. Human engineering had always been about making things work under impossible conditions. And now that philosophy was applied to starship design, Captain Ryan Blake commanded the USS Defiance, humanity's first true capital ship, built using principles that no alien engineer would recognize. Instead of concentrating vital systems in protected areas, human designers spread them throughout the ship, so that the vessel could continue fighting even when 60% destroyed. The weapon systems were modular and redundant. The power generation was distributed across dozens of small reactors, and the armor was designed to absorb energy rather than simply deflect it. When the Zephyrian fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system, They found a fortress where once there had been empty space. The asteroid belt had been transformed into the largest defensive installation in known galactic history, with weapon platforms hidden inside every large rock and sensor networks that could track individual fighter craft across millions of kilometers. Most disturbing to the alien commanders, they detected energy signatures from human installations that registered as impossible on their instruments. High Admiral Vextar had studied the recordings from the first battle until he knew every human tactic by memory, but what he saw now made no sense according to everything the Empire knew about technological development. The human fleet that emerged to meet his forces was not just larger and better armed than before. It was qualitatively different. The ships moved in ways that violated known physics, appearing and disappearing from normal space, and their energy readings suggested power sources that should have taken centuries to develop. The Second Battle of Sol began when the Zephyrian fleet fired their planet-killing weapons at Earth itself, intending to end human resistance with one devastating blow. The energy beams that could crack continental plates struck something that should not have existed, a planetary defense shield that absorbed the incoming fire and somehow made it stronger. Dr. Chen's quantum field manipulators had turned Earth into a fortress that became more powerful the more it was attacked, drawing energy from incoming weapons to power its own defenses. Captain Blake led the human fleet in a counterattack that used tactics borrowed from every form of warfare humanity had ever developed. Human ships appeared behind enemy vessels using quantum transportation, struck with weapons that ignored conventional defenses, and disappeared again before the aliens could respond. The USS Defiance materialized directly beneath the Zephyrian flagship and fired a full salvo of antimatter torpedoes into its unshielded belly, crippling the massive vessel in seconds. What terrified the Zephyrian crews was not just the power of human weapons, but the creativity with which they were used. Mining lasers designed to cut asteroids were reconfigured to slice through alien armor. Construction robots became autonomous fighters, and cargo ships turned into kinetic weapons that struck with the force of nuclear bombs. Every piece of human technology seemed capable of being weaponized in ways that alien engineers had never considered. The turning point came when the human ship, Roosevelt's Pride, commanded by Captain Sarah Williams, found itself facing 3 Zephyrian cruisers simultaneously. Her ship was outgunned and outnumbered, but Williams had been a fighter pilot before becoming a starship captain, and she understood something that alien commanders did not. Sometimes the best defense is an impossible offense. She ordered her ship to charge directly at the enemy formation, while spinning like a drill bit, using rotational motion to deflect incoming fire, while her own weapons carved through alien shields. The Roosevelt's Pride destroyed all 3 enemy cruisers in a maneuver that Zephyrian military doctrine said was suicide, and her success inspired the entire human fleet. Other captains began improvising their own impossible tactics, using 3-dimensional thinking that came naturally to a species that had evolved in gravity wells. Human ships dove and climbed through space like atmospheric fighters, used asteroids as cover and weapons, and coordinated their attacks with a precision that quantum communication made possible. Dr. Chen's greatest achievement revealed itself when the Zephyrian flagship attempted to retreat. The massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion had been the pride of the Empire for centuries. Its weapons had reduced civilizations to ash, and its mere presence had been enough to make entire star systems surrender. But when High Admiral Vextar ordered maximum acceleration toward the edge of the system, his ship found itself surrounded by human vessels that had somehow appeared from empty space. The quantum transportation technology that Dr. Chen had developed allowed human ships to appear anywhere in the solar system instantaneously, making traditional fleet movements obsolete. Admiral Morrison's voice came through on all frequencies as human ships materialized around every surviving Zephyrian vessel. "This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. Your fleet is surrounded and your flagship is disabled. I am offering you one chance to surrender before we finish what you started." High Admiral Vextar looked around his bridge at displays showing human ships appearing from nowhere. Weapons that defied physics and tactical innovations that turned every assumption about space warfare upside down. In 6 months, humanity had not just improved their technology, they had revolutionized it in ways that should have taken centuries. His communications officer reported that 18 of his 24 capital ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the survivors were all surrounded by human vessels that could disappear and reappear at will. For the second time in his career, High Admiral Vextar ordered his fleet to retreat, but this time it was not a tactical withdrawal. It was a rout. The surviving Zephyrian ships limped away from Sol with their shields down and their weapons offline, escorted by human vessels that could have destroyed them easily, but chose not to. Captain Blake's voice followed them as they fled, carrying a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy within days. Tell your Empire that Earth remembers its friends and never forgets its enemies. As the broken Zephyrian fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and looked out at the debris field that had once been the most powerful invasion force in galactic history. Humanity had not just won a defensive victory, they had demonstrated capabilities that would fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy. The age of Zephyrian domination was ending, and the age of human expansion was about to begin. But first they had a message to deliver to the Empire that had dared to threaten their world. The news of the second Zephyrian defeat reached every corner of the galaxy, faster than the speed of light, transmitted through quantum communication networks that human engineers had begun sharing with worlds that had suffered under Empire rule. For the first time in 3,000 years, species across the galaxy heard something they had never thought possible. The Zephyrian Empire could be beaten. Rebellions that had been smoldering for centuries suddenly burst into open warfare, and the Empire found itself fighting on 100 different fronts simultaneously. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching real-time displays of galactic conflicts that Dr. Chen's quantum sensors made possible. The strategic situation was clear. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing under the weight of its own oppression, but that collapse could either lead to freedom for billions of beings, or it could create a power vacuum that would tear the galaxy apart. Humanity had started this avalanche, and now they had to guide it towards something better than what came before. Captain Ryan Blake received orders that no human military officer had ever expected to carry out. He was to take the USS Defiance and a small fleet of human warships beyond the solar system for the first time in history. Their mission was not conquest or exploration, but something far more dangerous and important. They were going to the heart of the Zephyrian Empire to deliver a message that would either prevent a galactic war or guarantee that humanity would be fighting for survival against every advanced species in known space. Dr. Lisa Chen made final adjustments to the quantum transportation system that would allow the human fleet to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Her technology had evolved far beyond simple matter transportation. She could now manipulate space-time itself, creating corridors through higher dimensions that made interstellar travel instantaneous. The implications terrified her, but the alternatives were worse. If humanity could not project power beyond their own system, they would eventually face enemies who had learned from Zephyrian mistakes. The human fleet that departed from Sol consisted of 12 ships, tiny compared to the forces that galactic empires typically deployed, but each vessel incorporated technologies that should not have existed. The USS Defiance led the formation, followed by ships with names like Enterprise, Yorktown, and Constellation, names that carried the weight of human naval tradition into the depths of space. Every crew member understood that they were not just representing Earth, but the hopes of every oppressed species in the galaxy. High Admiral Vextar sat in his quarters aboard the crippled flagship Eternal Dominion, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything the Empire knew about technological development. Human ships had been detected in 16 different star systems simultaneously, appearing without warning, delivering supplies and weapons to rebel forces, and disappearing again before Imperial fleets could respond. The humans were not just defending their own world anymore. They were actively undermining Zephyrian authority throughout the galaxy. The journey to Zephyr Prime took the human fleet through regions of space that no Earth-born human had ever seen. But Captain Blake was not interested in sightseeing. His ships moved through quantum tunnels that Dr. Chen had mapped using principles borrowed from theoretical physics, emerging in normal space only long enough to verify their position before disappearing again. They passed ancient civilizations that had been reduced to tributary status, worlds where billions of beings lived under the shadow of Zephyrian dominance, and systems where the Empire's mining operations had stripped entire planets bare. When the human fleet materialized in orbit around Zephyr Prime, Every defensive system on the planet went insane simultaneously. The most heavily defended world in galactic history suddenly found 12 unknown ships hanging above their capital city. Vessels that had appeared without triggering any of the early warning networks that were supposed to detect incoming threats from light years away. The Zephyrian High Command had exactly 30 seconds to wonder how this was possible before Captain Blake opened a communication channel to the entire planet. "This is Captain Ryan Blake of the United Earth Federation, speaking for Admiral Morrison and all of humanity. We have come to deliver a message to the Zephyrian High Command and to demonstrate that your Empire's days of unchallenged dominance are over. You have two choices. You can continue your aggressive expansion and face the consequences, or you can enter into negotiations for a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than conquest. To show our sincerity, we will now provide a demonstration of our capabilities." The demonstration was brief but unforgettable. The USS Defiance fired a single quantum torpedo at an uninhabited moon orbiting Zephyr Prime, and the moon simply ceased to exist. Not vaporized, not shattered, but completely removed from reality as if it had never been there at all. The weapon used principles that Zephyrian science said were impossible, manipulating the quantum structure of matter itself to erase the target from the universe. The psychological impact on the planet below was exactly what Admiral Morrison had intended. The Zephyrian High Command consisted of 12 ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than some species had existed, and none of them had ever experienced fear like this. Their orbital defenses were useless against enemies who could appear from nowhere. Their weapons could not target ships that existed partially outside normal spacetime, and their entire military doctrine was based on technological superiority that had just been rendered obsolete by a species they had dismissed as primitive only months before. Captain Blake's next transmission was received in absolute silence throughout the Zephyrian capital. "We do not want to destroy your civilization. We want to transform it into something that the galaxy can live with. Your empire has brought order to the stars, but it has done so through fear and oppression. Humanity offers a different path, one where advanced species use their capabilities to lift up others rather than subjugate them. We are willing to share our technology with any civilization that commits to peaceful coexistence." The human fleet remained in orbit around Zephyr Prime for exactly 1 hour, long enough for their message to be broadcast throughout the Empire, and for every military commander to understand that the old rules of galactic warfare no longer applied. When they departed, they did so by simply fading from normal space, leaving behind quantum signatures that Zephyrian scientists would study for decades without understanding. The demonstration had achieved its purpose. The Empire's invincibility had been shattered forever. High Admiral Vextar received a personal message from Captain Blake before the human fleet disappeared, delivered through quantum communication directly to his private quarters. "Admiral, you are a warrior of honor who served your people with dedication. But the age of conquest is ending and the age of cooperation is beginning. Humanity remembers that you showed mercy to our defeated enemies, and we will remember that when we decide the fate of your empire. There is a place for the Zephyrian people in the galaxy we are building, but not for the empire that has oppressed so many others." As news of humanity's demonstration reached every corner of the galaxy, the pace of rebellion accelerated beyond anything the empire could control. Species that had been slaves for millennia suddenly found themselves receiving quantum communication equipment and weapons from mysterious human ships that appeared without warning. The Zephyrian military found itself fighting wars where the enemy could coordinate across interstellar distances and receive supplies from nowhere, while their own forces were trapped by conventional physics and limited by traditional logistics. Dr. Chen monitored the galactic situation from her laboratory on Earth, watching quantum sensors that showed the collapse of the old order in real time. The technology she had developed to defend her world was now reshaping civilization itself, and the responsibility terrified her. In trying to save humanity from conquest, she had given them the power to conquer the galaxy themselves. But Admiral Morrison had convinced her that power could be used to build something better than what had come before, a galactic civilization based on mutual respect rather than fear. The Zephyrian Empire fell faster than anyone had expected, not through military conquest, but through the collapse of the fear that had held it together for 3 millennia. When species across the galaxy realized that the Empire could be defied successfully, Rebellions erupted on every frontier world simultaneously. The quantum communication networks that humanity provided to rebel forces allowed coordination across impossible distances, turning isolated uprisings into a galactic revolution that the Empire's conventional military could not contain. High Admiral Vextar found himself summoned to an emergency session of the Zephyrian High Command, where 12 ancient rulers faced a crisis that threatened everything they had built. The Empire's military was stretched beyond its limits. Rebellions were spreading faster than they could be suppressed, and human ships continued to appear throughout their territory, delivering weapons and supplies to anyone willing to fight for freedom. The old admiral stood before his leaders and delivered the most difficult report of his career. "We cannot win this war," Vextar told the assembled rulers. "Not because we lack the firepower to destroy our enemies, but because we are fighting an idea that has already spread beyond our ability to contain. The humans have shown the galaxy that our technological superiority is not absolute, and every species that has suffered under our rule now believes that freedom is possible. We can destroy worlds, but we cannot destroy hope. And hope is what drives every rebellion against us." Captain Ryan Blake received new orders from Admiral Morrison as his fleet patrolled the outer regions of former Zephyrian space, liberating worlds that had been under Imperial control for centuries. The USS Defiance and its escort ships had become symbols of hope throughout the galaxy, appearing wherever oppression was strongest and disappearing before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Blake's mission had evolved from military action to something more complex. He was helping to build the foundations of a new galactic order. Dr. Lisa Chen worked around the clock to establish quantum communication hubs on newly liberated worlds, creating a network that would make future tyranny nearly impossible. Her technology allowed instant coordination across galactic distances, but more importantly, it allowed every species to share knowledge and resources in ways that had never been possible before. The scientific advances that resulted from this cooperation accelerated at a pace that amazed even Chen herself. The message that changed everything came through diplomatic channels that the Zephyrian Empire had not used in living memory. A formal request for negotiations delivered by High Admiral Vextar himself. The proud warrior who had once commanded the most powerful fleet in the galaxy now found himself asking for terms from a species that had been building mud huts when his people were traveling between stars. The irony was not lost on him, but the alternative was the complete destruction of Zephyrian civilization. Admiral Morrison agreed to meet with Vextar aboard the USS Unity, humanity's first purpose-built diplomatic vessel, constructed in the neutral space between Earth and what remained of the Zephyrian core worlds. The ship incorporated Dr. Chen's quantum technology to create a meeting space that existed partially outside normal reality, where negotiations could proceed without fear of interruption or espionage. The symbolism was deliberate. This new galactic order would be built on transparency and mutual trust. The negotiations lasted for 3 days, with High Admiral Vextar representing the remnants of the Zephyrian government, and Admiral Morrison speaking for humanity, and the dozens of species that had joined the growing galactic alliance. The terms that emerged were unlike any treaty in recorded history. Instead of demanding tribute or territory, humanity proposed the dissolution of the Empire and its replacement with a cooperative council where every species would have an equal voice in galactic affairs. Vextar listened to Morrison's proposal with growing amazement. The humans were offering to share their advanced technology freely with all species, including the Zephyrians who had tried to conquer them. The only requirement was a commitment to peaceful coexistence and cooperation, backed by binding agreements enforced through quantum communication networks that would make deception impossible. It was the most generous terms ever offered by a victorious power, and it left the old admiral struggling to understand human motivations. "Why are you doing this?" Vextar asked during a private moment in the negotiations. "You have defeated us completely. You could demand anything you want, and yet you offer us equality and partnership." Morrison's answer would be remembered by historians for millennia, because we have seen what happens when one species dominates all others. It leads to stagnation and oppression that hurts everyone, including the dominators. We want to build something better, where every species contributes its unique strengths to common goals. Captain Blake led liberation missions to the former Empire's core worlds. But these were not conquests in any traditional sense. Human ships arrived carrying medical supplies, educational materials, and quantum communication equipment rather than weapons and occupation forces. The message was clear. Humanity was interested in partnership, not domination. Former Imperial worlds found themselves being invited to join a galactic community where their participation was voluntary and their contributions were valued. The transformation of galactic civilization accelerated as more species joined what became known as the Galactic Cooperation Council, established on a massive space station constructed in orbit around Earth. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, incorporating architectural styles and technologies from dozens of different species, creating something that no single civilization could have built alone. It became the symbol of a new age where diversity was strength rather than weakness. Dr. Chen's quantum technologies became the backbone of the new galactic civilization, but they were freely shared rather than hoarded for human advantage. Scientific research stations throughout the galaxy worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single species, from mapping the quantum structure of reality itself to developing new forms of faster-than-light travel that made the galaxy feel smaller and more connected than ever before. Admiral Vextar signed the final dissolution of the Zephyrian Empire in a ceremony broadcast throughout the galaxy, formally ending 3,000 years of imperial rule and transferring authority to the elected representatives of the Galactic Cooperation Council. As he handed over the symbols of imperial power to Admiral Morrison, Vextar reflected on how completely his understanding of strength and power had been transformed by these remarkable humans. The regret that consumed Vextar was not for his empire's defeat, but for the millennia of wasted potential that could have been avoided if the Zephyrians had chosen cooperation over conquest from the beginning. He had lived long enough to see what the galaxy could become when species worked together, rather than fighting for dominance, and he understood that humanity's greatest victory was not their military triumph, but their vision of what galactic civilization could be. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Cooperation Council headquarters, watching ships from dozens of species arrive and depart in peaceful cooperation. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still conflicts and disagreements, but they were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than warfare and oppression. Humanity had struck back against those who threatened their world, but their greatest achievement was showing the galaxy a better way to exist together among the stars. 5 years after the first Zephyrian ship entered the Sol system, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Cooperation Council now included over 200 species, each contributing their unique knowledge and capabilities to projects that benefited everyone. Scientific advances that should have taken centuries were accomplished in months through collaborative research. Medical breakthroughs saved billions of lives across dozens of worlds, and artistic exchanges created new forms of beauty that no single species could have imagined alone. Admiral Jake Morrison, now serving as the first Director General of the Council, walked through the gardens of the orbital headquarters, marveling at plants from worlds he had never seen growing together in perfect harmony. The space station itself had become a living symbol of what cooperation could achieve, with architectural styles from across the galaxy blended into something that was both beautiful and functional. Children from dozens of species played together in areas where their parents worked on problems that affected the entire galactic community. Dr. Lisa Chen continued her research in laboratories that she shared with scientists from civilizations that had been developing quantum theory for millennia before humans learned to make fire. Her human perspective on physics, shaped by a species that had evolved to solve problems through trial and error, complemented alien approaches that relied on mathematical elegance and theoretical perfection. Together, they were unraveling mysteries about the nature of reality that none of them could have solved alone. Captain Ryan Blake commanded the USS Horizon, humanity's first deep space exploration vessel, leading mixed-species crews on missions to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. These expeditions discovered new forms of life almost weekly, from crystalline beings that existed in the hearts of stars to energy creatures that swam through the vacuum between galaxies. Each new discovery was shared immediately with the entire galactic community, expanding everyone's understanding of what life could become. High Admiral Vextar served as an advisor to the Council, his centuries of military experience now devoted to preventing the conflicts that had once defined galactic civilization. The old warrior found purpose in helping younger species avoid the mistakes that had led to the Zephyrian Empire's rise and fall. His personal transformation from conqueror to peacemaker inspired others who had served oppressive regimes, showing that redemption was possible even for those who had participated in galactic tyranny. The quantum communication networks that Dr. Chen had developed to defend Earth now connected every inhabited world in the galaxy, making instant coordination possible across distances that had once isolated civilizations for millennia. Trade flourished as species could negotiate agreements in real time. Cultural exchanges happened at the speed of thought, and scientific collaboration spanned the entire galactic disk. The barriers that had once kept species apart were dissolving rapidly. New challenges emerged as the galactic community grew. Not every species adapted easily to cooperation after millennia of isolation or oppression, and some conflicts arose from fundamental differences in biology and psychology. The methane breathers of the outer rim required completely different environmental conditions from the silicon-based crystalline entities of the core, while the hive minds struggled to understand species that valued individual consciousness. The Council's greatest achievement was developing frameworks that allowed such different forms of life to coexist peacefully. Admiral Morrison often reflected on how humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not their technology or their military victories, but their fundamental approach to problem-solving. Humans had evolved as a species that survived by adapting rather than dominating their environment, and this perspective proved invaluable when dealing with the complex challenges of a diverse galactic community. Where other species sought perfect solutions, humans embraced good enough solutions that could be improved over time. The Galactic Renaissance, as historians would later call this period, saw advances in every field of knowledge as different species shared their unique perspectives on reality. The eternal philosophers contributed insights into consciousness and existence that transformed psychology and philosophy. The geometric engineers shared mathematical principles that revolutionized architecture and physics, while the time-sensitive species helped develop new approaches to causality and temporal mechanics. Captain Blake's exploration missions discovered evidence of ancient civilizations that had faced similar challenges millions of years before, species that had either achieved galactic cooperation or destroyed themselves in wars that left entire star systems barren. These archaeological findings reinforced the importance of the path that the current galactic community had chosen, showing that the choice between cooperation and conflict was one that every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually faced. Dr. Chen's latest research suggested that consciousness itself might be a fundamental force of the universe, as important as gravity or electromagnetism in shaping reality. Her studies of different forms of intelligence across the galaxy revealed patterns that suggested the universe might be naturally inclined toward increasing complexity and cooperation. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the galactic community's development toward cooperation was not accidental but part of a deeper cosmic principle. The memorial service for the victims of the old imperial system took place on a dead world that had once been the site of a Zephyrian mining operation, where an entire species had been worked to extinction in the pursuit of rare minerals. Representatives from every member species of the Council gathered to remember those who had died under oppression and to renew their commitment to ensuring that such tragedies never happened again. High Admiral Vextar spoke for many former Imperial officers when he dedicated his remaining years to honoring the memory of those his empire had failed. The transformation was not without its critics and challenges. Some species argued that the rapid pace of change was destroying traditional cultures, while others worried that the human approach to problem-solving was becoming too dominant in Council decisions. These concerns were addressed through careful reforms that protected cultural diversity, while maintaining the cooperative framework that had made galactic peace possible. The Council learned to balance unity with diversity, progress with tradition. Admiral Morrison received delegations from newly contacted species almost weekly, civilizations that had heard stories of the galactic transformation and wanted to learn how cooperation had replaced conquest as the dominant force in interstellar relations. He always told them the same story, that the galaxy's transformation began when one small planet refused to surrender to overwhelming force, but it succeeded because that planet chose to build rather than destroy, to include rather than exclude. and to trust rather than fear. The greatest irony of the galactic transformation was that the Zephyrian Empire's attempt to conquer Earth had ultimately created exactly the opposite of what they intended. Instead of adding one more tributary world to their empire, they had awakened a force that would liberate every world under their control and transform the entire galaxy into something that served everyone, rather than just the powerful. The regret that consumed former imperial leaders was matched by the gratitude of billions of beings who now lived in freedom. As Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Council headquarters, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive and depart in peaceful cooperation, he understood that humanity's greatest victory was not that they had struck back against those who threatened them, but that they had shown the galaxy a better way to exist together. The transformation that began with one planet's refusal to surrender had become a revolution that touched every corner of known space, proving that even the mightiest empires could fall to an idea whose time had come. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.